Welcome back, everyone, to Open Line. We are talking via Zoom with Professor of Business Strategy, Dr. Mark Cohen from Vanderbilt University, talking about the new stance that some businesses are taking. The jump-off point for the conversation was what we saw after some Republicans voted to overturn the election, and some businesses said we are no longer going to make political contributions to those businesses. It's led to a larger discussion kind of about where businesses are going as far as how political they are going to be. And fascinating last segment. I wanted to ask in this segment, someone everyone pretty much knows as a brilliant business person, Warren Buffett. Does he have an opinion on how political businesses should be?
Yeah, interestingly enough, he does, and he's probably said other things as well. But the one item I know about is on gun control, and you know, he has a personal view which is very much pro-gun control. And you know, he's been asked on many times. I think I mentioned Citigroup has a policy that says we're going to work with clients or retailers who sell guns to make sure that they have controls, and so basically gun control kind of focus. And most other banks have stayed away from that completely. And then you had Dick's Sporting Goods, and so you've had these kinds of issues. And Warren Buffett came out and said, look, I don't believe on imposing my political opinions on the activities of our companies and our investors and our businesses. That's his view, and I don't think there is a right or wrong answer to this. That's his political view. When you start to say, you know, how do you translate your political view into business? Well, you know, if you're the business owner, you can do that, right? And I think what he's saying is, and you know, the other thing, if you're a publicly traded company and you're the CEO and you start imposing your political views on your company, and it's not in the company's interest, what's going to happen? Well, likely large investors will flee or take the company over or kick you out. Your board of directors will kick you out. So you know, the very complicated question. But yeah, Warren Buffett, it's interesting. He's very clear on that. He says, I'm basically saying I'm a gun controlled person, but you know, that has nothing to do with my companies. And
that's not how he's going to decide who he invests in. He's going to stay away from that. Even though he may have a personal point of view, he's going to stay away from that. And there's no doubt he's been very successful.
Exactly. Listen, you know, being successful financially, you know, people talk about corporate socially responsible investing, and I always love this example. People say, well, you know, I want to invest in sin stocks, you know, the gambling and liquor and tobacco and now marijuana, you know, and the returns on sin stocks have sometimes been better than the returns on socially responsible investing. So you know, you have to be careful about when you make these statements that it's just good for business.
That's interesting. Now you recently you were involved in a class. You were talking about the business response to structural racism. And you had said earlier that you've seen a change in your students over the 30 plus years you've been teaching. What happened when you brought this up? How should businesses respond to structural racism? What happened in the class there?
Well, it's interesting, Ben. Well, first of all, you know, I developed the course over the summer, and it's really not, as far as I know, ever been taught in an MBA program before. And, you know, I didn't know if I'd even get students interested. I had full class. I had, I forget, 40 some students. It was a large class for me. And it was really interesting. I had students who took the class largely because they said, and not the majority of them, but a lot of them said, you know, I've been hearing so much about structural racism. I don't think it exists. I'm not racist. I don't. And so what's this all about? I want to learn, and I want to be able to respond. On the other hand, I had a lot of students who said, yes, I mean, this is a huge problem. And let me tell you, we're you know, the class itself was probably 80% white. I don't remember the exact numbers, but I mean, this was not a class taken by minorities. I mean, there were plenty in there, but it was a really interesting mix. And so we had a really interesting time, examining the same kind of topics that we've talked about, Ben. I mean, should Netflix move money, invest money in black-owned businesses? There's something called the 15% pledge, which is getting major retailers to try to move to 15% of their supply chain being from minority-owned businesses. But then you have all kinds of things that are structural that you don't think about. Race discrimination in not just in hiring and promotion, which you have, but you have it in places that business really didn't even necessarily intend to. For example, Airbnb, you may be familiar with this. They had a real problem when they found, and researchers found, that if you had a black sounding name, you were less likely to be rented to when you tried to get on Airbnb and rent. We had the same thing with Uber. Black customers were picked up less often, took them longer to get there. And so you have this stuff that it wasn't Airbnb or Uber trying to discriminate, but yet their platforms were being used in ways. And so then the question becomes, if you're a business and you care about things like this, your employees care about it, your customers, potential customers, how do you design the product, the platform, so that some of this discrimination doesn't happen? So even though legally maybe Uber and Airbnb aren't necessarily legally responsible and didn't directly discriminate, they're trying to find ways to reduce that discrimination from happening. So it's a structural problem. Again, is business responsible for it? And sometimes yes, sometimes no. But can they be part of the solution? The answer is oftentimes yes.
That is very interesting. And so, where do you think we'll be? Does that make you more optimistic, maybe, than somebody who just watches the news all the time? I mean, do you think that businesses could, in fact, lead some sort of major change, or not? Is that way too optimistic? And I mean, what do you think? It's fascinating, as you said, over the last 30 years, what you've seen. Where are we going to be in the next 20 years?
Well, I guess I'm an optimist by nature, so you got to take that with a huge a grain of salt. I mean, but I do think the trends are very positive, and like I said, I think the companies are realizing that their employees and their customers and their shareholders are oftentimes moving them in this direction. And if they can't benefit from it directly, and it's going to cost them a lot, then they have an incentive to push it onto the rest of the industry and promote legislation. And that's the example I was giving with climate change, where it's in the company's interest to say, look, I'm being forced to do these, and it's costing me. So let me get the entire industry to do it, or let me get the entire society to do it. So it is, I think, an optimistic view, given the situation of where we are. I mean, if we were in a much less polarized society, that would be probably different. I think that we'd have a lot more focus on government.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, no doubt, we're polarized right now. Okay, we're going to take a break. We'll come back, I think, for our very last segment. We'll take a break. Be back right after this.